Hi everyone. Lately I've been reading a fair bit about tanks, and so for today's review I want to take you through this particular book, The Soviet T-62 Main Battle Tank, written by James Kinnear and Stephen Sewell. This impressive book is published by Osprey, and if you are a lover of detail, and I mean nuts and bolts detail, well then you will absolutely love this book. It is crammed full of information about this tank, not just its interior workings, but also the various sub-variants, additions, revisions, modifications made to this tank by not just the Soviet/Russian army, but by the countries that ended up using it, and all the various changes that happened all the way through into the 21st century. But let's wind ourselves back a bit and talk about the tank itself. The T-62 had a complicated evolution, which is all laid out in the book. And along the way we get some fascinating insights and anecdotes into how the various tank design bodies worked. And one particularly fascinating anecdote is that the one reason that the tank got its 115mm smoothbore gun is because the marshal who had to sign off on it was, on this particular morning, in a very foul mood because he had been hungover. And when he had been notified that other countries were putting 100mm guns on their tanks, he flew into a rage and absolutely demanded that the 115mm gun be perfected and placed into the T-62 tank. Sometimes it helps to be hungover. The layout of the book is straightforward. We learn about the genesis of the tank, about its entry into service, its various versions, and we get extraordinarily detailed breakdowns of what it's like to be inside the tank, which components go where. It's essentially a nuts and bolts look at the tank and some of its major variants, and you can see some photos up here. A lot of interior photos are done in beautiful color. Being an Osprey book, the reproduction is absolutely magnificent. In addition to this, we have diagrams, we have cutaways, we have different images showing some of the different components of the tank itself and its various versions as well. There's also an appendix that even has small articles about things such as the snorkel equipment. It's allowing the tank to drive underwater, communications, the different ammunition that was used. This is quite thorough for a book and goes through into this tank in extreme detail. The part that I enjoyed the most was there's a separate chapter that looks at the tank in service and how perceptions about the tank evolved over time. Through reading this as well, this is also probably the one spot where the editors could probably have taken a better look at some of the writing. There are some long run-off sentences, and you can't explain complex military or political situations in a 4-line sentence. It's quite jarring. So a slightly strict editing there would have made reading some of those sentences and paragraphs better, but this is a minor gripe. I mean, most people will be looking at this tank for the nuts and bolts, and you will be rewarded in spades. But it's also fascinating, particularly for me. That's where my interest in this tank lies, is understanding how it was used in combat, and also how its perception evolved over time. It was used in many wars, and apparently right through, at least in Russian service, right through until 2008. And it's also still in service with some countries today. Reading the battle reports, particularly of the epic battles that were fought in the 1973 October War, the performance of how it was used in many of the conflicts since then, and particularly its utility and use in Afghanistan, is fascinating and enlightening. And because these authors have been able to use and access Soviet/Russian resources, we also get a bit more of an inside view into this tank, and particularly how the tank crews viewed this tank. It's actually a perfect accompaniment for those of you who follow some of the videos from the Tank Museum in Bovington and their analysis on Soviet tanks and their tours of those tanks inside. If you can't go to those tanks, and if you can't crawl inside them, or if you're a modeler and want to model a particular type of the T-62 or any T-62, well then this book is a fantastic resource for you. For all of the information, for everything that is compressed, that is easy to read, easy to understand, and the amount of detail that has gone into explaining the literal nuts and bolts of this tank, this is a four captain's hats. It's phenomenally detailed, wonderfully researched, and profusely illustrated, which you've seen, no doubt, right through in the corner up here. So if you love tanks, and in particular if you've got a soft spot for Soviet tanks, then do check this book out. Absolutely highly recommended. And if there are any other books about military aspects, let me know. I have some books, quite happy to review them if they're in my library. Just let me know what you're interested in. And until next time, enjoy and happy reading!